All right. All right. Well, hey, guess what? It's the week of Easter. It's Holy Week, and it's we are 4 days down, and we've got 4 more days to go. So, um, and and I preached Easter yesterday, so
So you're ahead of the game.
I'm ahead, and I'm like, this is the weirdest I've ever felt.
Yeah,
It's in the
So
can,
we can't
and
change your mind before you do
no,
it
I
then,
mean I
I don't.
could, but
I don't
it
think
would
so.
it would
Regardless of
complicate
what we
things
say.
greatly.
right?
Oh dear.
So anyway, no, Mark 16 is the text I picked for my Easter sermon. One for a couple of reasons. One um, is because I wanted to kind of step away from Luke for just a moment and get a different perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with Luke's resurrection narrative, um, but uh, um, but Mark has an interesting way of approaching the resurrection story, um, which I'll get to in a little bit. But it's just to hear a different voice, and so so those are the reasons why. But when you read Mark's resurrection story, you see that the focus is not necessarily um, um, on like uh, the miraculous nature of the resurrection. It's really on the disciples' response to Jesus having been risen. Um, there's no earthquake. There's no, um, you know, there there's no like giant fanfare kind of deal. It's a really um, simple following of the women from 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 the end of the Sabbath to them walking away or fleeing in terror. And it's actually quite fascinating when you dive into it. So that's what we're gonna do today. So Acts 16, and the text I will read for Sunday that you'll see I've already done obviously is verses 1 to 8. So this is the text for today. So when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been risen. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went, so they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now, um, depending on the setup of your Bible, you may notice that there's more text in the Gospel of Mark. There's some in mine. I have what's called the shorter ending of Mark, which is actually an extension of verse 8. And then there's the longer ending of Mark, which is verses 9 through 20, I believe. Yeah. Um, Now, we can get into the scholarship of that if you wish, but just know that some Bibles just keep going from verse 8 all the way to 20, and they just keep going, and they don't make any distinction of a longer ending or shorter ending. Um, and then they just do that. Some Bibles will separate them out and say, here's the short ending and here's the long ending. Some will make a footnote and say, there's some issues of whether these are actually from Mark or whether they're later additions and things like that. So just know that depending on what Bible you have, there may be some, or what Bible your folks have, there may be some discrepancies on that, and some wonderings about that. We'll get to that. But that's not really the crux of the Easter message for this week. So hold on to that. Just put it in your pocket for right now, and we'll come back to it. So Mark focuses on these three women in his resurrection story. There's Mary Magdalene, there's Mary, the mother of James, and then Salome, who is the mother of the sons of thunder, James and John. So she's Zebedee's wife. And so those are the three ladies. And they, so it opens with the idea or the phrase, when the Sabbath was over. Now, I'll talk about this on Sunday, but the Sabbath starts sundown Friday and ends sundown Saturday. That's the Sabbath. Because in Jewish understandings, days begin when the sun goes down. So if you think back to creation, in Genesis chapter 1, the days were from there was morning and there was evening, day one. So there's this pattern over and over again. So the Jewish understanding of a day is when there is no more, or when the sun goes down under the horizon, that's the end of a day. So the Sabbath begins on Friday evening at sundown. So that's why it was so important to have Jesus's body removed from the cross and put into the tomb before the Sabbath began, and it had to happen before the sun went down on Friday, because you couldn't do any work on the Sabbath. You couldn't, carry heavy things. You couldn't walk more than like 2,000 paces. I mean, there were certain regulations about the Sabbath that they would follow. And so Jesus, so what happens is that because of everything happening so quickly between Thursday and Friday with Jesus, the women didn't have time to prepare for the burial of Jesus. I mean, Joseph of Arimathea, if you read back to the end of chapter 15, you see that Joseph of Arimathea takes the body down and he wraps him up and lays him in the tomb. But the women didn't have the chance to anoint him with oil, wrap him with spices inside that linen cloth and stuff like that. So when the sun goes down on Saturday, that's the end of the Sabbath. So the chapter actually starts on Saturday night. And so the women go on Saturday night to find some spices and to buy them from somebody who'll sell them to them. And again, you have to think of in an age of no electric lights, as soon as the sun goes down, it's starting to get dark, and it'll get darker quicker and quicker as the day goes on. So they didn't have time to prepare Jesus's body before he went into the tomb, and so they go out early, or they go out late on Saturday, buy these spices, and then they go, verse 2, they get up very early the next morning. So they get up probably before dark, or before light comes up, before the sun rises, and says when the sun had risen, then they went to the tomb. So they were up late Saturday, they're up early Sunday, and now they are going to anoint Jesus's body and put these spices on him. These aromatic spices would do a couple of things. One is they were part of the the worship life of Judaism. In they would probably be some of the spices that would have been used in incense offerings and things like that in the temple. So they would have helped remind them of those worship. It was essentially an act of worship to him. But also because they had aromatics, they were, you could smell them. It would diffuse a little of the decay. I mean, they didn't do embalming or anything like that. And typically what would happen is that bodies would be left in the tombs until they decayed, and they were just bones, and then the bones would be taken and then moved somewhere else, and then the tomb could be used again. So it just made the whole process smell a little bit better. But it's it's one of those logistical things that.
Yeah, no embalmers.
Right. Yeah. We didn't have funeral directors to just be like,
No.
okay, hold on, let me get the formaldehyde out. And anyway, but the essence of it was that it was a loving process. This is what close family did for someone who has passed. And it was an important part of the process. So they're up late Saturday, they're up early Sunday, and then they, when the sun rises, then they go to the tomb. And they know where the tomb is because at the end of 15, Mary and Mary see where Joseph puts him. So they know where they're going. So even as in the wee hours of the morning, they know where they're going. But notice that in verse 3, they're saying to each other, who will roll away the stone? They saw the stone get placed in front of the tomb, but in their desire to get to the tomb and their desire to anoint Jesus's body, and I would say in the midst of their grief and sorrow, they didn't think far enough ahead to go, oh, we might need some muscle to get this thing out of the way. Now, for having been through seasons of grief in my own life, and there are certainly moments where you don't think very clearly, and you sort of you get an idea in your head and you sort of rush off and you're like, oh, and you get halfway there and you're like, oh, I have no way to actually accomplish this. And so my guess is that's sort of the conversation that they're having. It's like, they're looking at each other going, oh man, who's gonna muscle this stone out of the way? And so they're having this conversation. But then there's the phrase in verse 4 that really, really struck me. And I'm going to hit on this. I hit on this in my message. Verse 4 says, when they looked up. This is the moment where they shift their attention from the plans that they're making to anoint Jesus, the conversation that they're having about who's going to muscle this stone out of the way, and probably a further conversation of how much they miss Jesus and how much things are going to change from that moment on. And so if you just visualize these women walking along the road, focused on one another, focused with their eyes sort of downcast on the road, because it's not light outside yet. I mean, it's getting lighter as they travel. So more than likely they've got to pay attention to the terrain. But they're sort of inwardly focused. And then Mark tells us when they looked up, when they finally, rose their gaze from their self, their conversation and all the things they were dealing with, and they finally looked at the tomb, they see that the stone is rolled away already. And this is, I say this on Sunday. I said it yesterday, but it'll be in the message on Sunday, that this is the moment where they see hope, even if they don't recognize it yet. This is the moment where all the like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to figure this out? What are we going to do? Kind of questions go away, because they see the stone has already been rolled away, that the heavy lifting has already been done for them. And so this, like that phrase right there was, that when they looked up, it's like when we can get out of our own heads and look and see what God is doing in the world, it's like everything becomes clear. Even if we can't like grasp it yet, even if we can't figure everything out yet, even if we can't see exactly how everything's going to play out, that's when hope shows up. That's why, when I think about Easter, I don't. When I think of a visual for Easter, I see the open, empty tomb. I see the stone rolled away. I see that that's the that's the power and the magnitude of the resurrection, is that the heavy lifting has been done for us. Because we think, oh man, how are we going to do this? How are we going to roll this stone away? How are we going to, how are we going to make ourselves right with God? And Jesus says, without even saying any words, he's like, I already did it for you. It's already right there. The stone has been rolled away and the heavy lifting has been done. And I was just like, when I got to that point, when I was doing my sermon prep, I'm like, oh man, I got to do this now. I got to go preach now because this is great. So, and I tell a story about Caitlin in that section from about a decade ago. And Caitlin always loves it when I use her as a sermon illustration. So they look up and they see that the stone has been rolled away. And my guess is their conversation changed to, what just happened? And that's really the question, is in all of this is what just happened? How did that happen? And so they go into the tomb, and then there's this young man dressed in white, and he's just sitting there. And they're alarmed, they're afraid, they're anxious, they're like, that's let's see, yeah, they're I was trying to look and see if I had a quick definition of that, but they are sort of taken aback by the fact that there's somebody sitting there, because they expected, in going to the tomb, they expected Jesus's body to be there. That's what they expected. We look at it from 2,000 years post resurrection and we go, why would they expect Jesus to be there? He's going to be resurrected. But they expected it. They wouldn't have gone and bought spices. They wouldn't have been up late Saturday night. They wouldn't have been up early Sunday morning if they didn't expect his body to be there. And that's why they're amazed when they walk into the tomb and there's no body. There's this guy dressed in a white robe, and he's all like, don't be alarmed. And it's like the first thing you say when somebody's alarmed is, and you mean them no harm. So they're alarmed. He says, don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is not here. He's been raised. Here's where, here's where his body was. And, and then he gives them instructions to go and tell the disciples. So again, they went to the tomb expecting to find Jesus's body there, to anoint him for burial, to have his body, and my guess is not only to anoint him and to rewrap his body and everything as an act of love and worship, but then to close off the tomb again when they were done somehow. But then everything changed because when they looked up, the stone had been rolled away. All right. I feel like I'm going to preach again. Anyway.
I can tell you're you're
I
floating.
know. I'm like, let's go. Okay. So here we go. So he says, he's been risen. He's been raised. He's not here. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Mark is the only gospel that differentiates between the disciples and Peter. And if you think about who Peter was and what Peter did, this is a moment and it's just a simple little thing. But this is Mark separating out Peter just a moment so that there is intention for the news of Jesus's resurrection to be shared specifically with Peter. Now, Peter's the one who, like, you're the Christ and you're the Messiah, and he was the one, and so he's the first one to admit that, but he's the one who denied Jesus 3 times. So this moment here, because Mark is the gospel that is written first, historically we understand that most scholars, there's a few Matthean priority gospel folks, but anyway, sorry, I'm going to go off that. I won't go off on that tangent just yet. But
Okay.
typically, there's a whole school of thought that thinks Matthew's gospel was written first. But anyway, most scholars hold to the fact that Mark's gospel was written first, and then Matthew and Luke used him as a source and added their own stories to it, added their additional material. But there's also the understanding that Mark had close relationship with Peter, and probably had Peter as sort of the eyewitness, helping him to write down the stories that became Mark's gospel. Anyway, so there's this little moment right here where Mark is connecting specifically with Peter, and having the women specifically say, you go tell the disciples and Peter. And it offers this moment where Peter will have the opportunity that we get recounted in the Gospel of John, of this restoration. He denied him 3 times, and then there's, Peter, do you love me more than these? Yes, I love you, feed my sheep, over and over, 3 times. So there's this 3 times restoration for the 3 times denial, and it sort of tease that up a little bit. Yeah. I was I didn't mention that in my sermon because it's really it's really hard to preach across gospels sometimes because you get confused. So I try not to do that. But he says he'll go ahead of you to Galilee, which was obviously the center of Jesus's ministry for his preaching and teaching. It was also the main place where his disciples were from, so they would have been familiar with it. And it's also not Jerusalem, which is the place that rejected Jesus. So he goes to Galilee. That's a place that feels like home for them. Within verse 8, the women went out and they fled. They ran. For terror and amazement had seized them. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And if you just leave it at verse 8, if verse 8 is the end of the Gospel of Mark, it's no wonder that some people came back around and go, oh, no, you can't end like that. You can't do that. There's no way you can end the gospel like that. They've got to tell the story. So then the shorter ending of Mark is basically a couple more sentences. It says, and all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterward, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west, the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. It's like, oh, we got to redeem the women here in this moment. It's like, they didn't do what they were told, so we're going to come in and go, oh, well, Jesus stepped in and shared the good news. And so that's how we know what we know. The longer ending of Mark has Mary Magdalene sharing the news, and but they don't believe her, which is similar to what Matthew and Luke do. And then Jesus appears to two disciples, walking with them, which has parallels to the Emmaus story at the end of Luke, and the two disciples there. And then there's the commissioning of the disciples, which we have echoes of in Matthew, and then the ascension, and then but in between there's the whole speaking in tongues and picking up snakes and all that. This is fun stuff. It's like, that's why there's these little churches sometimes that are like, they're snake handling churches because of Mark 16. It's like, I'm gonna pick up this snake and it's not gonna hurt me, and it's like, are you sure about that? Anyway, but then the ascension of Jesus, which then gets replayed in both Matthew and Luke as well. So there's a lot more. Again, there's a lot more scholarship around Mark being the first gospel written, and then being the primary source for Matthew and Luke, as the other two synoptic gospels, and because there's a lot more that they share that they don't share. So anyway, okay, yeah. So there you go. I'm like, I need to go back and preach again. Anyway.
In case you missed part 1.
Right, yeah. I got 30 more minutes of material now. All right, let's go. Easter part. Let's part 2. Let's go.
Yes.
The rest of Paul Harvey. The rest of the story.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. So there you go. That's Mark 16. What questions might you have about that, or what jumped out at you as to something you want to ask about, or something you need some clarification on? I'm ready and willing.
I wouldn't have noticed this if you hadn't taken us to the end of chapter 15 in Mark, but it talks about Joseph putting him in the tomb. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. He,
Yeah.
not they, he.
Right. Yeah.
So all this other discussion about how hard it would be to move if you had the disciples do it, that would seem to obviate that.
Yeah. So I think the essence is that I don't know. These three women may have been able to just muscle it themselves, but the question becomes, I think it's. I look at it more as they were expecting Jesus's body to be behind the stone when they got there, and so they were asking the question in order to figure out how to get to him. So.
I'm not trying to negate anything here. I had never read that particular sentence before that I remembered. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Well, and I read someplace, probably in the study Bible, but it said that they had notched out a place in the rock where that stone actually fell into, stay in place.
There was probably some of that in play where, in order for it not to move, or be more difficult to move, there was some kind of trench or
Right.
something
That
that
makes sense.
had
That makes
to
sense.
where gravity
Yeah.
was working in your favor to get it to seat in there, and then it would take a greater amount of force to get it up and out of that.
That visual helps a lot right there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's right here. It says, seeing the large stone in place was a relatively easy setting in place, but once it had slipped onto that groove cut in the bedrock in the front of the entrance, it would be very difficult to move.
Excellent. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they're just they're acknowledging that, again, we don't seal tombs that way now. So it's out of our our realm of visualization. I mean, we think of coffins and we think of mausoleums and things like that.
locked door, yeah.
Yeah, a locked door. So yeah, that's how they did that. And in even our current depictions, we think of this sort of perfectly round stone,
Stone.
that was
Like we do in Vacation Bible School.
right. Right.
And we do our storytelling. It's always round and we roll it right in.
Right. I mean, more than,
Not going to be that.
it probably wasn't. I mean, it could have been, but it was probably slightly out of round. Yeah, again, that's all speculation, and it's just it needed to be sealed, so mainly to contain the smell is really what it is that if it's seated in there properly, then you can walk by it, depending on where it was, without having to have offensive odors emanating from it. I think about there's that whole John 11, when Lazarus is in the tomb, and it's been 4 days since he's died, and Mary and Martha's biggest deal is it's going to stink when you open that up. And, a body that's been decaying for 4 days with without modern modern help, yeah, it's going to stink. That's just what's going to happen. So they didn't have refrigeration. So anyway, there you go. All right, what else? So if the gospel ended at verse 8, like I would pose this question to your class, like if the gospel ended at verse 8, what would you be able to do with that? How would you handle that? If they just run away, they say nothing to anyone because they're afraid. What do you do with that? I mean, again, that's why it's hard to preach across gospels in the same message, is because they, one, in our reading of it, they typically inform one another. But if all we had is Mark's gospel and we have 8 verses, chapter 16, what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that they didn't tell anybody because they were afraid? What do we do with that? That's a fun question for them to wrestle with.
Well, plus where else, and I know it is, but where else are the references to the Great Commission?
Matthew 28.
Okay, that's embedded in this. That would have been sad to not have had that in there as well.
Right. So, and I think because of those, because those last, 12 verses or so of chapter 16 have those parallels, I think that's why this segment has survived. And I haven't dug totally into the authorship issues with the end of chapter 16. But looking at it, I mean, it operates a lot in a lot of the same ways as other parts of Mark do with Matthew and Luke, where Mark tells like a little bitty snippet of a story, and then Matthew puts his take on it and adds his flavor to it, and Luke tells the thing and he adds his flavor to it, and it pushes forward their narrative and their telling of the Jesus story. So it operates a lot like that, and yes, it really does complete the story. It's like, how did the gospel continue on with this? If that's the end of the story, given that Mark is most likely written in the late 50s. Think about where we're studying, what we're studying in Acts. The late 50s is when Paul was on the move, and he was sharing, the good news wherever he could. So that, so when scholars look at that and they look at the ending of, they didn't say anything to anyone, they're like, but they did. They look at the reality of history and they go, but they did. Somebody said something to somebody, because now we've got this explosion of people. And so it's, somebody said something to somebody. So this can't be the end of the story. And so whether they came back and they're like, okay, Mark, you got to have, there's got to be more to the story. And he came back and, edited the end of it, or whether it's been, added on to it, it's still, it functions as a way to, I think it functions in a way to reflect what's actually going on and what actually happened in history. So and again, if we have 2,000 years of hindsight to put on this. And I think oftentimes we're really quick to judge the women for not saying anything, or like, oh, why were they afraid? I mean, this was the thing that they, that he had said. But you think about in the midst of if you think about Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and now Sunday, if you think about the trauma that had gone on for those days, and the grief and the sorrow and the emotional weight of everything that's happened over that period, that short period of time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would be ready to just share with everybody, what's gone on, or this new development that's happened, and with the way that Jesus dies at the hands of the Romans and the Jewish authorities. I mean, I don't know if I would be quick to be like, hey, that guy that you thought you killed, it's not there anymore. They're probably thinking, who's going to be next? If they didn't get this guy, or if somebody went and got this guy, like Matthew tells Matthew has at the end of his gospel that the Romans paid off the guards to tell everybody that somebody came and stole them while they were sleeping, while they were laying down on the job. Anyway, and so that's the story that gets told over and over again. but the idea that who's next? I mean, are they going to just start chopping off heads down the list? And are these women even they were there? They were there at the cross, so they're going to be identified. They're going to be like, you right there, you're one of them. And some guys like Paul are going to come along and be like, I saw you, and I saw you, and I saw you. Anyway, I think we're too quick to, I think in the 21st century, I think we're too quick to wag our finger at the first disciples. Yeah, and that's a sermon for another time.
Now he's going to get on another
I know,
podium.
I'm gonna get another. Be like, all right, let's get it. It's like, all right, don't blame.
Soapbox, here we go.
That's right. Yeah. Oh goodness. Very good.
Okay.
What else? Can push my buttons on something else and I'll jump on another soapbox.
Different subject. Are you to a point yet where you can tell us what we're going to do in the fall?
Nope, I am
Okay.
not to the point in that. Sorry.
Did you have any luck talking to Bobby about the parking lot?
I sent him a
Union?
message and I talked to him, and I kind of gave him some. He had a couple of questions about, like, are we going to do it like full on setup? Is it just And so I said, let's just go for like a PA, keyboard, a couple of microphones kind of setup. And so he's getting that. He's running those numbers for me. So, and it'll be. I mean, that's kind of what we're going to do for Sunday morning, Sunday Easter sunrise. Will be, a microphone for me, a microphone for Casey, and keyboard. So I think I know we can do that. It's the getting it hooked to the transmitter so that it's in the cars. And then if we need to broadcast it any farther than that, with any additional speakers, because I think we don't have powered speakers, which means they don't have internal amps. They rely on an external amp to get them down. Anyway. I'm speaking over my head now.
That's another
I could talk about
story.
Bible all day. I can't speak about technical things like that. But what I understand is, like, sometimes speakers they have internal amps, and all you got to do is plug them in, and then they play whatever you need to. And sometimes they need that external source to go in and go through. So, anyway. He's working on it.
Good.
Yep. All right. So after this week, we have 4 more weeks in the book of
I've
Acts.
got a call that I have to take, so I'm just going to go ahead and sign off.
All right. Thanks, Gary.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you. Have a good one.
You
Bye,
too.
Gary.
All right, Miss Sandy. Anything else?
Now, did I read it right? I mean, your next sermon on Acts is going to cover actually the 2 weeks,
No,
right?
it'll just be 25.
Okay, because Peggy and I both looked at it, and she was right there with me.
Because I preached on Acts 24 for Palm Sunday.
Right.
And then I'm doing Mark 16 for Easter. And then on the 11th, I'll preach on Acts 25.
Yeah, it's because you went into 24 for that Palm Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very good.
It's one thing reading far ahead of the class, and then it's another when I'm thinking I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks, but I'm not going to be gone for all the 2 weeks. So just wait till you get older.
I know. That day is drawing ever
Nothing to
nigh.
do with Oh my word. Hey,
According to my
this
kids, I am
business.
already old. So,
Oh yeah.
I know.
Let them be around Don and Sandy Donovan. But anyway.
It's good. I saw y'all
Yeah,
from the
that's-
backside on Saturday at the service for Patrick.
Oh,
So y'all were in the line, about 3-4 people in front of Debbie and I. So.
yeah, we ended up being the very last to go through the line to. And that was our own fault because late instead of getting there to discuss and talk with them ahead of time. But very, very good service. Did a really good job. That was a hard one.
Yes, those are particularly hard when they're young.
Yes.
Hey, Doc.
Uh-oh.
Happy anniversary. Hi.
Uh-oh, my anniversary meal is here.
Wow. Hey, Jack in the Box.
He knows I love their tacos.
Tacos.
Yeah.
Their
Well,
tacos
he
are
was
pretty
going to
good.
get up this morning and he was going to go and get me huevos rancheros for breakfast. And I said, I've got potatoes already made. Why don't I make it? So this is, yes.
Congratulations. Wow. How many years for
Yes,
y'all?
thank you. 41.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, we were talking that that seems just unreal, and he had a 9-year marriage prior
Oh.
that resulted in a son, and I had a 9-year marriage prior that resulted in a son, the one that we don't acknowledge now. But yeah, we'd be doing our 50th this time, so we'll get there.
Yes, you will.
We'll get there.
You will. Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, have a
Glad
good day and kind of breathe easy now that you have already done all your preaching.
I know.
Sit
Now I
back
just have to
and relax.
watch the videos and make sure everything is good on those, and then I'll be good.
Yes. Oh well. Oh well.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good one. Thank
You
you.
too, Sandy. Take care.